He claimed that he saw a huge fire in Stockholm, Sweden, while he himself was 300 miles away, that he was instantly aware of it. You know, obviously, this is before Twitter, so he wasn't just reading retweets. Or they were divine retweets. I'm not sure where we land with that. History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Hello, my friends. You can call me Al. I guess we can do a bodyguard thing, too. So Al says, I've listened to your show for a while now, and someone I've heard mentioned several times on Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, as well as some sister shows, is Emmanuel Swedenborg. It catches my attention every time, because I was raised in a church called the General Church of the New Jerusalem, a religion also known as Swedenborgism. I can't say I completely subscribe to its beliefs, but it takes its ideas from the works of Emmanuel Swedenborg. And these books are seen as the second coming of God through Swedenborg. It's a fairly small religion, says Al, but it's always been fascinating to me. The level of devotion this group of people find in one man's writings. I myself have read at least parts of his books, and they actually have some extremely interesting ideas in them. I went to an extremely small private school based on this religion, and Swedenborg's books were the basis of our religion classes, and they were brought into almost every other class we had as well. I don't mean to diss on the religion or your brief mentions of Swedenborg. Thanks, Al. But the difference between this religion, which holds them to be a revered prophet, and outside people who see him as just another generic psychic is quite interesting to me. I'm not sure exactly what the point of this email was, but I thought I could offer some perspective on the guy as someone who grew up in a religion centered around him. I also wonder what other obscure religions there are that have similar origins to this one. And then Al ends saying, P.S. One of my favorite books by Swedenborg is called Earths in the Universe, also known by some other long name I can't remember. But it's a fascinating read and talks about spirits and aliens on other planets in our solar system, as well as other unknown planets. His writing takes a bit to get used to and can be confusing, but even removed from the religious context, I still suggest giving it a look. It can be quite entertaining. Al. So Al, thank you. I'm considering this an official recommendation for the Stuff They Don't Want You to Know book club.
Just glancing through his bibliography, they all sound fascinating.
Really, this stood out to me because Swedenborg reminds me in some ways of other prophetic figures like Edgar Cayce, who I think we may have done a YouTube episode on or something many years ago, but I can't remember. It might just be something we all talked about for a while, but it brings us to kind of, I don't know, it feels like a good setup for the origins of religions that are sometimes considered fringy, maybe, or not as well known. As like the Abrahamic religions or as Hinduism and Buddhism and all the other big ones. So let's talk just a little bit about Swedenborg. He's active from the he's born in the late 1600s. He's active into the late 1700s. He lived to be 84. And right now, he's best known for a book he published in 1758 called Heaven and Hell. You would call him kind of a Renaissance man these days, theologian, scientist, philosopher, and yes, mystic. So for a lot of our more skeptical listeners, just calling someone a mystic might seem like it already damages their credibility. But his story is really interesting to me, and it makes me want us to look at more examples of kind of self-proclaimed prophets that were maybe non-canonical. Because, most people are familiar with the prophets that are listed in older established religions, right? But there is a proliferation of people who are non-canonical prophets. Like they and their followers consider them Christian adjacent prophets or even prophets of another religion that the status quo just thinks of as regular people, or maybe heretics. This guy thought he was divinely inspired. He didn't really get started on this until he was 53 years old in 1741, and he didn't spend his whole life being like a charismatic thinker and preacher. He started to have these crazy dreams and visions when he was in his 50s, especially one Easter weekend in 1744. And he believed, and I have no reason to question this belief, I don't think he was after the money. He believed that the biblical Jesus Christ had divinely appointed him to reform Christianity, the whole thing. And he had these powers, again from his statements, that he could visit heaven and hell, he could speak with angels, and he would, well, here's the thing. He predicted the end of the world. I think the three of us saw that maybe in the cards. Yeah.
In 2022, November.
No. What?
No? No, I'm just joking. I don't know when he predicted
Jesus,
the
you had me
world.
going there.
Yeah, I'm being, you know what, I'm editorializing a little bit because he actually said, if I understand this correctly, he actually said the Last Judgment had already occurred in 1777, but he went ahead and published another work in 1758 concerning the New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine. And right now, there is a little bit of a debate over whether all of his works are divinely inspired or whether just a few are. But as you pointed out, Al, we will call you Al, this did inspire a movement that continues today. The new church is actually a group term. There are several different historically related denominations of Swedenborgism, and I don't know. So this is where my American comes out, right? I believe in religious plurality. I think if you're not hurting anyone, then you should be able to believe what you like. But Swedenborgism has some criticisms, and they're historic. They date back to the 1700s. But just with all this now, all this information we have now, I've got to ask you guys, Matt, Noel, Matt, what do you think about the idea of someone being divinely inspired and accruing followers in this regard? Are we all very skeptical about it, or where do we stand?
Super hard to disprove. How do you disprove if someone is actually being communicated with by some other entity? You could question that person. You could give them a truth serum even. You could hook them up to a polygraph, and if the person truly believes it, then you're going to get the same results, right? Even if it's not true. It's very odd.
The idea here is, I don't know, one of fairness, one of letting other people do as they will, but I think it only really becomes dangerous when that leader, whomever they are, is directing people to act against their own physical, emotional, or psychological interest. And I feel like that's a very easy line to draw because there are numerous alternative, you would call them, religions where people are just fine. It gives them the spiritual solace they need. They're not hurting themselves or anybody else. I feel like with that in mind, we can totally say, let's go for it. But I also think I want to get in contact with Al. I'm actually going to do that later, Al, so act surprised, unless Swedenborg predicted it. Want to get some more understanding of the idea that he had spiritual or psychic powers. This was much more common actually back in the day than it was in later centuries. There was this proliferation of people who felt divinely inspired, or they made predictions, or they claimed to be clairvoyant. And ever since that time, there have also been people who have said, that it's bunk. Which, to be clear, we're not doing yet. But would you guys be interested in exploring these kind of lesser known spiritual leaders?
Yes, 1,000,000%. I mean, this guy, I don't know, his list of works, the names are just in and of themselves is fascinating. Doctrine of the Lord, Doctrine of the Sacred Scripture, Apocalypse Revealed, Divine Providence, interaction of the soul and the body. Like, there's just so much to unpack here. And I think, even like something like Baha'i faith, the more modern prophets. I think there is something for an episode and that kind of stuff. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, it's weird. It's weird to think that there are probably just as many people today, if not way more, who feel this. Ben, just to your point of like it was more common back in the day for people to be divinely inspired or feel divinely inspired. I think now we just label it as some kind of mental health crisis or issue rather than what we would consider someone who truly felt divinely inspired, right? Or was hearing voices of another from a higher power.
Yeah, and part of that is, the spread of mass media and ubiquitous communication. Swedenborg's so interesting because what you're describing, Matt, that is something he experienced as well. A lot of his peers thought, wow, this guy is, lost it, right? They say he's no longer mentally fit. The church of the time actively opposed him, and like you pointed out, Al, a lot of people didn't get his writing because it's pretty. If you've read it, if you've read some of it, I haven't read all of it, obviously, but if you've read some of it, then you'll see that it's very involved. It's very articulate. It can be very advanced, and he is actually responsible for inspiring a lot of things, a lot of movements that would later. That would be much more recognizable to the average person today. Like you can see claims that he sort of paved the way for the spiritualism movement. He also had several stories that people went back and forth on when he was alive that were anecdotes about his psychic abilities. I think the most famous one was in 1759. He claimed that he saw a huge fire in Stockholm, Sweden, while he himself was 300 miles away, that he was instantly aware of it. Obviously this is before Twitter, so he wasn't just reading retweets. Or they were divine retweets. I'm not sure where we land with that. Whether or not you believe it, he has a very developed understanding of what he sees as the afterlife, the nature of reality, and heaven and hell. He believes in he believes in both of those things. Like Christianity is very much the base. I want to really explore the idea that he may have had strange powers, or that people believe he did, and some people believe even now. There's a whole period of history that is often ignored in the mainstream, and let's dive into it and let's see what we can find if we separate the fact from the fiction and find some clarity in the controversy.